Hello everyone, it's Mr. Peak and welcome to your second lesson on Python programming. So this lesson we're going to take a deep look at what variables are and how we use them in Python. So to start with, I'm going to cover what we looked at last lesson, just as a quick recap. So last lesson we looked at the print function, which allows us to write a line of text onto the screen, and that text can be whatever we want. We also looked at basic inputs and debugging programs, which means to fix errors in programs. If you need a recap on these topics, you can always go back and look at the first video that we did, or just put a message in the team chat and I can quickly demo what the print function does and what inputs are. But for now, let's move on. So, this lesson we're going to look at variables and how we use them in Python programming. So firstly, what is a variable? Well, in computing, a variable is a location in the memory of a computer in which you can temporarily store some information. So think of it like this way. When you move house, you pack all of your stuff into boxes. So for example, when you're packing up your kitchen, you might put all of your plates into one box, and then you close that box. So you've temporarily stored, let's say, some information, your plates, in that box. We then need to put a name on that box. So for example, I might write plates on that box. Because, if you move into your new house and you've written books on that box, or you haven't written anything at all, you wouldn't know where to unpack your information, what you've got inside that box. So variables are the same thing. We store some information inside of like a virtual location inside of the computer, and we have to put a name to that information. So we have to give the information a name. So, let's have a look at some examples of variables that you come across in your daily lives. So, your age. Your age is a variable. So when someone asks you your age, you unpack that box where you've stored your age, and you tell them your age. So if someone asked me for my age, I'd unpack my box and I would say 22. And then you update your variable every year. So you update the information inside of your variable every year, once a year. And then again, your height. Your height changes all the time as you grow up, and if someone asks you for your height, you give them the information that's stored inside your box. So for me it would be 6'2". So that is the information I have stored inside my box called height. So these are kind of examples of variables that you use in real life. So let's have a look at variables that we use in computing. So we've got two examples here, one you might recognise and one you might not. So the first example is from a game called Among Us, which you might have heard of, I'm assuming you have. And there are quite a few variables that we can see on screen at the minute. So for example, the first variable that we can make note of is imposters. You can see there that we've got two imposters. Now at the beginning of the games, we can change those variables as users to decide how many imposters we want in the game. So that variable is changed. So if we, for example, put 4 in there, at the start of the game, the computer would randomly assign the status of imposter to any 4 random characters. So it's using the number stored inside the variable imposters to choose how many imposters it's going to make. Again, another example would be the voting time of 105 seconds. So we've chosen that, and we've stored the value of 105 seconds inside the variable called voting time. So when it comes to voting, the computer will open up that variable and see 105 seconds, and that's how long the computer will give you to vote. The second example is a supermarket scanner. So your parents may have used these when you've been shopping with them at Tesco or Sainsbury's or Asda. And these work in a very simple way. You scan a barcode, and then it gives you the product name and the amount it costs. So inside of a supermarket scanner, there would be two variables. There would be the name of the product and the price of the product. So when you scan that item, the scanner will ask for the price of that product. The scanner will then open up its box, and it will see it's installed. Let's see, this cucumber hole is 65p. It will see that the price is 65p, and then it will print that variable to the screen. So we can start to see that variables are always used to store information or values that we need to use in our program. So let's take a look at how we start to build that in the program and in Python. So here we've got a variable. So on the left hand side you can see here we have name equals. Here is where we're naming our variable. So imagine we've got a box and here we're writing name on that box inside the computer. And then we need to put something inside that box. So we've said equals. And then this is the contents of our box. So you can see here that I've got a box called name, and I'm saying the contents of this box is Mr. Peak. So we've declared a variable and the contents of a variable. So let's have a look at what happens to that in Python. Let's have a look at how we program that line of code. So if I move over to create with code and delete this line of code, to create a variable, we need to think of a name. Now there are certain rules around variables that you have to follow. One of the most important ones is, like I mentioned earlier, your name for the variable has to make sense. So let's say I'm creating a variable to store my age. I'm going to want to give that variable an appropriate name. So I might call that variable age. I could call it my age. Or, if I was asking the user for their age, I could call it user age. So as long as the name for your variable has some sort of relation to the information stored inside, it's fine. Everyone won't have the same variable name. I might write my variable like this. You could write it like this with a lowercase a. It doesn't matter, as long as the name for your variable associates with the information stored inside. Now we need to use the equal sign. So now we have our box called age, and now we're saying what's stored inside. So now I'm going to need brackets. So think of the brackets as the box. So here's the name written on the box, and here's our box. Now we need to put something inside of it. And what I'm going to put inside of it is my age, so 22. So now we have a variable. So what I want you to do now is, moving back to the presentation, we're going to have a quick look at the rules. So like I said, the first rule is consistency. When you name a variable, whenever you reference that variable, which we'll come to later on in the lesson, and I will go back to this just so you can go over it again, but name is not the same as name with a capital N or all uppercases. So yes, they're the same word, but to the computer, these are not the same. So name is not the same as name with a capital N or name with all capitals. Now you'll come to realise what this means later in the lesson, and I'll come back to it just to let you know. Secondly, spacing. Variable names should not have a space in between them. So we can either use underscores or what we call camel case, which is putting a capital letter where we want a new word, or to sort of reference that it's a new word. So let's have a look at how this looks in Python and show you why you can't do it. So if I move back to create with code, this is one whole word. If I tried to put a space in there, like here, and then tried to click run, the program doesn't work. It all needs to be one word. Let's say I did want to call my variable user's age. I can't write it like this. If I tried to run, it wouldn't work. So you can't have spaces in the names of your variable. I could either write it like this, or I could put a capital A to sort of show that it's a new word, and then if I tried to run that, I wouldn't have an error. Okay, so next, each variable is named so it's clear which variable is being used at any time. It's important to use meaningful names for variables. So like I said, you need to name your variable something along the lines of the information you've stored within. So if me or Sir or Mr. Chatton was to come and look at your program, we would know what information is stored inside your variable, so we could, run your program and understand what it's doing. And lastly, this is not, sort of a rule that everyone abides by, but it's good practice not to start your variable with numbers. So just, generally use words. It's less confusing for people. So the first task I want you to undertake is I want you to just create 3 variables for me in Python. So open create with code and create 3 variables. And I want you to create 3 variables that will store your second name, your age, and your favourite subject at school. Now remember, I want you to follow those rules when you're creating your variable. So if you need a quick refresher, just scroll back a little bit in the video and pause it there. So remember to name your variables appropriately and store some appropriate information inside. So when you finish that, make sure you pause the video here, complete the task, and then come back and unpause the video. Okay, so hopefully you've all created your 3 variables, and let's move on.